The House will come to order. Messages from the Senate.
A message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce that the Senate accedes to the request of the House for the appointment of a conference committee on the amendments adopted by the Senate to the following House file. House File number 1999, an act relating to state government appropriating money for the outdoor heritage. The Senate has appointed as such committee Senators Herr, Morrison, Mohammed, Pa, and Housley. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodden, Secretary of the Senate.
The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2335. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 2335, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to housing, establishing budget for the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, the third engrossment.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, the author of the bill, Representative Howard, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am proud to stand here today to present the strongest and most ambitious housing bill in this state's history. Wait a second. No applause? No. No. Sorry. That was just an attempt at humor. Sorry. Truly, I want to thank our whole committee for an amazing year. I want to thank our Vice Chair Agbaje for her leadership, her fierce leadership in partnership in this bill, our minority lead, Representative Johnson, all our members on the Housing Committee. I want to thank our CA, Adam Kopel, and CLA, Abdullahi, our amazing nonpartisan staff, Justin Cope, Mary Davis, Joe Harney, our partisan researchers, Molly Peterson and Lori Cousineau, our House page, Cassie Soar. And I also want to thank all of the Minnesotans who testified in our committee this year, who shared your stories, your struggles, your hopes, and your dreams. And it's those stories that are at the center of this bill. We are listening and we are taking action to make Minnesota a place where everyone has a home that they can afford. We heard from folks like Amanda, a single mother with 3 kids who experienced homelessness because they couldn't find a home they could afford. Teresa, a renter who's paying 70% of her income in rent and worries every day that she's one bad break away from homelessness. Dan, a mayor from northwestern Minnesota, who shares that the businesses in his community are desperate to find workers, but there isn't homes for those workers. These are the Minnesotans, again, that are at the center of this work. And boy, is it time for us to take action. We're seeing a housing crisis that's worsening, that's deepening, that's threatening Minnesota's economic future. We've seen a disturbing increase in evictions and homelessness, especially for children. Right now in Minnesota, there's 279,000 children that live in cost-burdened homes. That means these families are one bad break away from homelessness, and that's what's happening. Last year in Hennepin County alone, families saw a 250% increase in homelessness. So what are we going to do about it? A lot of things, but one of the things that I'm most proud of is our innovative plan to provide 7,000 new state-based housing vouchers to directly help low-income families stabilize and thrive. This Bring It Home model will be transformational and do more to address children and family homelessness than anything in the housing realm that this legislature has ever taken on. And underlying this challenge is the fact that home prices are rising, rent is escalating, and it's because there's simply not enough homes that people can afford. Minnesota has one of the worst supply-demand mismatches when it comes to housing. Right now, there is a more than 100,000 unit gap in terms of homes that are affordable for our most low-income families. And that's driving the reality that almost 600,000 Minnesotans are paying more than 30% of their income in housing. That is not sustainable, and it's getting worse. So what are we going to do about it? Well, it's not rocket science. We need to build more homes, and that's what this bill does in historic fashion. Our housing infrastructure bonds investment, Representative Hassan's home ownership investment grants, Representative Norris's work in manufactured housing, proven initiatives like the Challenge Program will help us build thousands upon thousands of new homes all across the state, border to border. This really is a build or break moment in our housing crisis, and this bill is here to meet that moment. We also know that the challenges in our state are border to border. We have a housing crisis, but those challenges differ. That's why we're tailoring solutions to areas of the state to meet community needs. In Greater Minnesota, we heard a lot about the challenges with workforce housing. We have a significant increase to address workforce housing in Greater Minnesota. We have Representative Brand's Local Housing Trust Fund and Representative Listlegard's Northland Foundation initiative. All of these investments will help us build the kinds of housing that are desperately needed in Greater Minnesota and all across the state. Another feature of our housing crisis is that we're simply losing more affordable housing than we're building in this state. In the last 6 years, we have data, Minnesota has lost 52,000 units of naturally occurring affordable housing. We've only built 8,000. So we're losing this battle day by day, and this state has never before taken a position or a role in preserving and rehabbing the naturally occurring affordable housing we have until this bill. We have a significant investment that I'm very proud of to preserve and rehab affordable housing for our constituents all across the state. When we're talking about our housing crisis, we cannot ignore our history of systemic racism that has created a system where some are in and some are out. Minnesota has one of the worst racial homeownership gaps. 78% of white households own their home, only 31% of black households. But we are taking bold action, the most ambitious bill to address our homeownership gap in state history. Vice Chair Agbaje's first-generation down payment assistance bill will create 4,000 new homeowners in this state, and Representative Hassan's innovative homeownership investment grants will help produce thousands and thousands of new homes. Members, we also need to recognize that even with a $1 billion historic investment, with one-time investments, we are not going to solve our housing crisis. We need consistent, long-term solutions, and solutions that actually meet the scope of the challenge we're up against. That's why this bill also includes a quarter-cent metro-wide sales tax, which will help us produce more than 1,000 new rental units per year, more than 1,000 affordable homes to own, and more than 3,000 state-based vouchers in the metro area to help families stabilize. This bill represents what I think all of us know, that everything starts at home. We cannot thrive unless we have a safe, accessible, safe place we call home. And this bill puts us on course to make that a reality for all Minnesotans. I really look forward to passing this bill tonight and the discussion and hopefully the support of this body. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend House File Number 2335, the third engrossment. The amendment is coded A29.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I enjoyed our time in committee. I think we all do have a very much aligned goal. I think we get there somewhat differently. And what this amendment seeks to do is, the chair is giving a lot of money to MHFA, and I think it's not an unreasonable request for us to ask how they're going to be staffing up to accomplish that. You know, we have added in Ways and Means the grant accountability amendment. I think that it's, again, a good idea if we can find out how many people are going to be doing this for the agency. And Mr. Chair, I think that this, I hope, is viewed as a friendly amendment, because they're going to be getting lots and lots and lots of money. And I think that it's a good idea for us to be able to say to the people of Minnesota that after a $1 billion appropriation from you, that we should be able to probably find enough money to generate a report. So I hope that this is a friendly amendment, but we'll find out in just a second, Madam Speaker.
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Nash. I, too, enjoyed our time on the Housing Committee together and believe that there's a lot of shared concern that housing is so vital for our future. I would encourage a yes vote on this amendment. I would note Minnesota Housing is already required to report on their agency operating budget on an annual basis, but this is, as you said, a big new investment. I think this amendment makes sense. I would encourage a yes vote.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, vote green.
All those in favor of the Nash amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend House Law Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A31.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Chair, another variation on the theme, very, very similar amendment in its intent. And I want this to be an annual report until the money that is appropriated has been effectively spent. And I believe we heard in committee a number of times that some of the appropriations that will be here in the bill may not all be spent in a very short amount of time, that they will be carried on forward. So I hope that we can be collegial on this one as well and say that, again, after $1 billion of appropriation, a report back on where we are as having a little check-in would be an appropriate measure. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, members, I would encourage a yes vote. I think this language might need some work in conference, but I appreciate the spirit of it and would encourage a yes vote.
All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend House Law Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A37.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would request a roll call on this.
Representative Nash requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Mr. Chair, this is the bill that we have agreed to have a conversation on. I think that the conversation around municipalities having an aesthetic mandate requirement of many of the, and not all cities, but many cities. And what we've found from research by realtors, Zonda, Zillow, many other places, is that when aesthetic mandates, and that is effectively a brick facade, or shutters, or requiring a third stall garage, or anything that isn't integral to the efficacy of the house itself or the home itself, those are optional items that, from my estimation, should be completely individually chosen. So if I want brick, or I want cedar siding, or I would like stone, or I would like to have a third car garage, maybe I'm a shutter guy. That should be my choice, not a requirement from the municipality. Members, what we found is that for every $1,000 that are added to the price of a home, that prices 4,000 people who are potential buyers out of the market. Now, let's put that in aggregate so that you have stone, you have shutters, you have that third car garage, maybe you have a certain type of textured concrete or stained concrete that's a requirement, maybe you have picket fences, or there's a myriad of things that could be a possibility. When that's a prescriptive element from the city, the market forces really aren't able to be borne out. And if I'm that buyer and I would like to buy this house, but maybe I just like a plain house, maybe I'm a minimalist, I don't get to do that. So with this amendment, we're trying to say that an individual should be able to say to the builder when they're building it, I would like these 4 things, but I don't want these other 9 things. And we've talked about local control a lot, and this year I seem to be the huckleberry for local control in all the different committees I'm in. There are times that local control is incredibly, incredibly important, and I have defended that on some of the bills that you all have carried. But there's also an element that I like to call local out of control. And local out of control means that prescriptiveness beyond what a reasonable buyer would like to do is something that we should not do or make them do. So I hope that we can support this, Mr. Chair. I know that we're going to schedule, after you all pass this tonight, we're going to start talking about when we can have that informational hearing that you promised me. But I think that this is a very good part of that quadratic equation that I talk about that we all love to hear. No one bill that we bring, including many of the elements that you have in your bill, Mr. Chair, no one part of that is the solution to housing. We're basically the worst housing market in the country. We are number 50 out of 50 states. We're not building enough starter homes. We don't have enough apartment buildings. We don't have enough places. And Mr. Chair, that's where you and I are aligned. I want to make sure that everybody on your side knows that I recognize each of these things is a huge portion of the solution. But as with any quadratic equation, you have to solve different parts of the equation in order to get the entire answer right. This is one of those things, I hope we can vote green, and I have requested a roll call, and I would love your support.
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Nash. Representative Nash, I agree with almost everything you said. I do think we need to be looking at taking a yes and approach and looking at the state's role in local planning because we do have a role, I think, in a conversation can help us create more housing that is affordable. I do think that's more appropriate for a conversation in the interim to do good bipartisan work on what is a pretty thorny, tough issue. We did hold a hearing on a version of this, Representative Elkins' bill. I'm hoping that gives us momentum as we move forward into the interim, but I would encourage a no vote on the amendment.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 32 ayes and 90 noes, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend House Bill number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A43.
Representative Nash.
We're on a roll. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is another part of the conversation to talk about do park dedication fees have a quenching effort on how cities and housing and developments work? Coming as a former mayor, I know that city park dedication fees are sometimes quite expensive. Parks are important, but they do factor into sometimes making it very difficult to build out in a parcel of land when builders are trying to hit a certain threshold. And Mr. Chair, this is one of the things that we have talked about, and I am hoping that we can have a conversation as we have agreed to talk about many of these things. I just want to put it on record that this is an important issue, and I want to talk about it over the interim, and I hope I can get your commitment to do that if the chair would yield.
He will yield. Representative Nash. Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nash, absolutely. I think this fits in the important bucket of work we need to do together on a bipartisan basis in a policy year, in the interim and into the policy year. So you have my commitment on that.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I know that I have an ally with Representative Elkins on this issue to have that conversation. I think all of us want to have a conversation because, once again, we don't want to be the worst housing market in the country. And with that, Madam Speaker, with the chair's agreement to speak about it over the interim, I will withdraw the A43.
Representative Nash withdraws the A43 amendment. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend House Law number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A45.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The A45 actually is quite popular with a lot of your members. And the idea here is that in a single-family zoned area that we should be allowing perhaps multifamily housing, like a duplex somewhere scattered in around the other homes. I have spoken to a good number of your members, and I was kind of overwhelmed as to how many pulled me aside and said, hey, I really like the A45. And I was talking with the chair that if we actually had put a roll call on this, it would go on the bill. That's how many of you are supporting this idea. Because I think you realize, as Representative Elkins does and others, that we have to start somewhere, and that this is a very good somewhere to start. So once again, I'll ask the chair to yield, Madam Speaker.
He will yield. Representative Nash.
Mr. Chair, is this another thing that I would assume that we can put into the informational hearings that we're going to have to begin building a case for next year's policy session to try to make some improvements for housing as we move forward in the state of Minnesota?
Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nash, that's right, and I agree. I think if we did take a vote on this, I think there would be support in this chamber. You're kind of after my heart with this amendment, but I do think it's best served in an overall comprehensive conversation, and look forward to having that in the interim.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Elkins yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Elkins, you and I have worked side by side on a lot of these things. I appreciate that we have a very good relationship on this. Can I count on your support to get this done over the interim, to have hearings and bring forward stakeholders that we both have relationships with?
Representative Elkins.
Absolutely, Representative Nash. You know, I've been working on this for 2 years. We've made a lot of progress. There's a few things that I think would benefit from another round of hearings and a number of the provisions in my bill. And I look forward to working with you and Chair Howard on this issue over the summer.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate that very much. I will let you know that for those that have had some trepidation with the amendments that we've talked about, I've also been talking with the League of Minnesota Cities, who have finally come to the realization that we do have to have conversations around these, and that simply saying no is not a viable answer, because Minnesotans want better than that. And I appreciate the chair, your willingness to have these conversations. I know that the League does. I know that the other interested parties do. I know that Representative Elkins will be there. He'll probably beat me to my own meeting. But these are important conversations for us to have, Madam Speaker, and I look forward to doing that. And Mr. Chair, you have always been a man of your word, and I've always kept my word with you. I look forward to having these conversations. And with that, I will withdraw the A45.
Representative Nash withdraws the A45 amendment. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Dotseth moves to amend House Law Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A35.
The member from Carlton, Representative Dotseth, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. The real simple ask I'm asking for today, with a $10 million appropriation that we have for fire sprinkler systems. As we're aware, what happened in the Seward community back a number of years ago, it's a justifiable ask for that $10 million. But we are asking for Greater Minnesota. It's just a mere, what are we looking at, $4 million to be directed to that area for Greater Minnesota. I think it's a simple ask that we're asking for. That's my ask today.
Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, Representative Dotseth, I think you may be speaking to a different amendment. The A35 deals with Greater Minnesota workforce housing.
We're in the sprinkler system.
Representative Dotseth, we are on the A35, which changes some appropriations.
Sorry about that, Madam Chair. I was on the wrong amendment here. I had the wrong one listed here. Workforce development. I think that's a real good ask to ask for here, is we're just looking for to move money from workforce development. Greater Minnesota has been lacking for many years. And I think we found that that's an area that has been lacked as far as a need for money is appropriated in that area. And what we are asking for is moving monies into workforce development from the Community Stabilization Program. And fellow Chair?
Representative Howard.
Speaker Hortman, Representative Dotseth, I would encourage a no vote. We are appropriating, I would note, $40 million additionally to the Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing Program in this bill. That's a 10x increase. The pot of money that this amendment would take from our NOAA Impact Fund is important. It does rehab and preservation all across the state, so I would encourage a no vote.
Representative Dotseth.
Respectfully, Chair Howard, I do ask for roll call on this. We look at a $17.5 billion surplus right now.
Representative Dotseth requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've got a $17.5 billion surplus right now. I think there's a reasonable ask to actually have some money appropriated and shifted over into workforce. As you're aware, there's a lack of housing. I think we've came to that agreement through a committee many times, that there's a lack of housing and workforce housing up in our Greater Minnesota and all of Minnesota. And I think it's a real good ask, and I would ask for your reconsideration on that. This is a good vote. Vote green.
Any further discussion on the Dutseth amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 56 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson moves to amend House File Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A44.
The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson, to the A44 amendment.
Madam Speaker, members, one thing that we've learned over the years, partially with the report by the OLA on nonprofits, and also the amount of money that's been used for other things other than what it's intended for. What this amendment does, it caps the amount of administrative fees that can be used, including salaries, but between the agencies and the grantees of the salaries and any administrative costs. And that's putting together the grants, sending the money out to where it needs to go, and it caps it at 10%.
Oh, sorry.
In this particular bill, if we capped it at 10%, that's over $106 million for administrative fees. $106 million. I've looked at a number of 990 reports on some of the nonprofits that receive this funding, and between salaries and administrative fees, they use 50% or more of the grant. 50%. If we're going to give this money out to help those in need, we should get it to them, not staff. Not salaries for executive directors that are well into the six figures, plus all the other staff they have. They're a nonprofit. They're there not to make a profit, but they're lining their pockets. In the Office for Justice, the administrative fees are capped at usually at 3% or less. I was generous. I went 10% here because right now there isn't a cap. So I do ask that you accept this amendment. Chair Howard, I know we've had some discussions, had some good discussions, but I think it's important that we get the money to the people that need it.
There's an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Howard moves to amend the Johnson amendment to House File Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A47.
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The amendment to the amendment simplifies the amendment to Representative Johnson's, but maintains the intent, which is to make sure that we're directing as much resources as we can to get where it needs to be to make impact in our community. The blanket nature of it still means we probably need some work on it in conference, but I would encourage a yes vote.
Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Representative Johnson.
Speaker Hortman, Representative Howard, I understand your amendment, but this will set it up so who knows how much they could use for salaries. Who knows how much executive directors of these nonprofits can make, and take away the funding for the people in need. vote no against the amendment to the amendment.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. We are on the underlying Johnson amendment. Any further discussion to the Johnson amendment as amended? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Myers moves to amend House File Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A21.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I request a roll call on this.
Representative Myers requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Myers.
Thank you. So this amendment is going to request that we take $6 million to convert unused public facilities and turn them into housing alternatives. So this would help homelessness. This would help our seniors. This would allow local cities to request grants to address those issues they have in their backyards. So we've had something similar to this in committee and put a little bit of spin on it because I put a smaller dollar amount, hoping that we can get some agreement on this. And I know we've had several conversations. I've had a couple members from the other side of the aisle come in and talk about supporting a plan like this. Sitting on the bonding committee, I actually heard Representative Erdahl have two bonding requests for two of his schools that were not being used anymore. And they came in and gave a pretty good plan as how they could convert those schools into housing in their communities. And for me, this is kind of how it came about to offer this in Housing Committee. I think this gives an opportunity to show efficiency by using current building structures that we have and spread those dollars out as much as possible. So I would ask Chair Howard and I would ask the members here to support another efficient way to increase housing opportunities for our homeless, for our seniors, and for our communities.
Discussion. Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, Representative Myers, I appreciate the amendment. I appreciate thinking outside the box. I think we need to do more of that in the housing realm in particular. But I would encourage a no vote. This wasn't a bill. I think we should do some work on this in the interim. It also is taking money from FHPAP resources for our families in need. So I would encourage a no vote. I do look forward to working on this issue because I think it's an idea worth pursuing.
Any further discussion on the amendment? The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Dotseth moves to amend House File Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A22.
The member from Carlton, Representative Dotseth, to the A22 amendment.
Groundhog Day. Repeat again the same amendment, different time. 822. This amendment is a good amendment. What we're asking for is appropriations of monies to be directed to Greater Minnesota. As I discussed earlier, I think it's the amendment that stands is a good amendment that's needed with the $10 million that's being appropriated right now, with a portion of it going into sewer development, which is needed after the tragedy that happened there. However, what I'm asking for is we've got aging buildings in Greater Minnesota as well. As most of you are aware, since I believe it was 1992 is when sprinkler systems were first required. There are a lot of aging projects in Greater Minnesota, and I'm asking that these monies, that we just look at a small portion of appropriations of Greater Minnesota. Chair Howard, I ask for your consideration.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much, Representative Myers. I think you talked about the tragic incident that happened in my district where we lost 5 individuals. And the outcome was there were no sprinklers. You know, when we drafted the bill, there were no resources that we allocated for when we passed the sprinkler bill for high-rise building in public housing. What we have here now is a resource that we are trying to identify which high-rise buildings do need the support. And in fact, in the other bill, I think there was a requirement for cities to work with the state fire marshal to identify which buildings do require sprinklers so that we can retrofit those buildings. If they're specific buildings, I will urge you to make sure that you get connected with the department so that they can receive this direct appropriation. You know, they can apply for the resources, whether they're private or a nonprofit. I hope you will support that process so we identify which buildings do need the sprinklers. Then we can allocate those funds. And quite frankly, I will promise you that I will fight for every building in the state of Minnesota to be retrofitted so they have sprinklers and we can save lives. Please vote no for now so we can make sure that we identify which buildings do need sprinklers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion to the A22 amendment. Representative Dotson.
Thank you. As I expected to hear that, but I would ask that Greater Minnesota, there's needs as well. And we're hurting up in Greater Minnesota, and this is a need that's needed up in a lot of different projects, all the way to Duluth, to Grand Rapids, to Cloquet. I think this is a justifiable question to ask for, and I ask for a green vote. Thank you.
All those in favor of adopting the 822 amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail, and the 822 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Myers moves to amend House Bill number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A42.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Hennepin, Representative Myers, to explain the A42 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I will request a roll call.
Representative Myers requests a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, so there will be a roll call vote. Representative Myers.
Thank you. You know, housing affordability is one of the pillars of that committee. And what this amendment does is bring a little accountability to some of the proposed changes that we're going to likely see. What it does is it asks that any rule changes that would increase the cost of a housing unit by $3,000 would need to come back to us to be reviewed. I wanted to actually make this probably $1,000, but I decided again to go a little higher to hopefully get some support on this. And a study recently said that, who did the study here? So the study was of new single-family median home prices. And I have several states here: Iowa, 370,000, Indiana, 381,000, Wisconsin, 403, Nebraska, 405, Illinois, my hometown, 428, and Minnesota is $523,000. So, you know, average those out, we've got a $400,000 average, and Minnesota's $122,000 higher. I think this is a good amendment to make sure that when the agencies and these groups are making changes, they're very mindful. And they're mindful that they don't put so much on potential homeowners that it's going to put people out of owning a home. So I would ask everybody to vote green.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Myers, thank you for bringing forward the amendment. I would urge a no vote. This sort of fits for me in this bucket of policy work we should do next year. This wasn't a bill that's introduced, but I think it's an idea that's worth an ongoing conversation. But at this time, I would encourage a no vote.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Man, I was really hoping you'd consider that one. Just some food for thought. So the National Association of Home Builders did a study, and for every $1,000 that is increased on a house, it puts 2,520 Minnesotans out of an opportunity to own a home. And, you know, that's a big number. And again, we talked about it a lot in the committee. And between balancing out my amendment of, you know, wanting to do 1,000, but 3,000, I mean, that $3,000 is going to do 7,500 people that can't get into a home. So I would hope everybody would, you know, support my amendment and, you know, make home ownership a little more affordable for people.
The clerk will take the roll on the A42 amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail, and the A42 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nash moves to amend House File Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A34.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Carver, Representative Nash, to explain the A34 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Chair Howard, we've been doing really well tonight, but I think the wheels may fall off the bus here. So, members, this is the amendment would delete Chair Howard's sales tax to provide $151 million in 24, $187 million in 25, $192 million in 26, and $198 million in 2027. So for those that weren't watching, and not everybody does, Chair Howard got a target of $1 billion. That's a lot of dollars. And on top of that, to pay for other things, you now have a sales tax that will be imposed in the metro area that I don't think Chair Gomez is here, but I know that she dislikes, oh, there she is. Hey, I know that she dislikes regressive taxes as much as I do. So, as I said in committee, Chair Howard, you're trying to help people who are in need of stable housing, but in the imposition of this tax, you're effectively destabilizing them because of its regressivity. So it's going to harm the people who you intend to hurt, or it's going to harm the people who you intend to help the most. And this is going to be on things that they purchase. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is going to harm people who need stable housing, and it's going to hit them in multiple levels. They're going to go to grocery stores and other stores. They're going to be making purchases for their day-to-day lives that right now, because of the way things are in the state of Minnesota with cost of things going up, we see some other taxes going up. We're going to see many, many people begin making decisions now that this will be imposed, if this passes, that may destabilize them. And, you know, we had a good conversation in committee, but I just want members to realize that this tax is exceptionally regressive. And I have quotes from Chair Gomez in various articles. And, you know, I don't want to belabor this per se, but it's going to really hurt people, the very ones you're trying to help. And Chair Howard, I know you have great compassion for people. We've had a lot of alignment in committee to make sure that people can find that place that I call the North Star, that they have a home. And as I have said in committee, there are homes that we rent, there are homes that we buy, but at the end of the day, we all say to our coworkers, I'm going home, and I want that to be reality for people. I think that this makes that less of a reality due to its just amazing regressivity. And I know that basically you ran out of money. Your $1 billion target wasn't enough, so you needed to go to the well and find a little bit more. I get that, but it is incredibly destabilizing for people who right now are trying to figure out what's on the menu for next week, and do they buy their kids a new pair of shoes? And what are some of the other decisions that they're going to have to make that long-term creates a level of instability that I don't think that you want? So, members, I would ask for your support. I am going to ask for a roll call, Mr. Speaker, to remove the tax from this bill.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote. Representative Nash.
Members, I would appreciate your support, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nash, members, I would encourage a no vote. This is the time, the moment for us to address our housing crisis, not just now, but into the future. As we had a conversation with transportation, housing isn't an issue where we have decided to put general fund dollars to truly address the problem in the long term. If our entire state general fund budget was a gallon jug of water, we spend less than a tablespoon on housing. And that would be the case in this budget as well in the out years. And so what we're doing with this Metro-wide quarter-cent sales tax is bringing in revenue that will address what is the number one cost for most families, their housing. Right now in the metro area, half of renters are paying more than 30% of their income in housing. You talk about regressive, you talk about paying over 30% of your income just to afford the roof over your head. And the impact of this Metro-wide sales tax increase would be 1,000 new rental units, 1,000 new affordable homes to own, and 3,000 vouchers for families to have housing stability. The benefits outweigh the costs in the long term, and I would encourage a no vote on the amendment.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, we had some discussion about this in transportation for the 0.75% sales tax, and now this is another 0.25% sales tax. That adds on a full percentage sales tax onto it. But one of the things that I didn't talk about in transportation that I think is important for us to know is that this is what legislature? It's the state legislature, meaning that we're responsible for the entire state. And it's kind of interesting to me that we are now, as a state, breaking out certain parts of the state to impose taxes on. We really don't do that with anything else. I think there are probably one or two other areas, maybe, but we are responsible for collecting throughout the state. When we have local option sales tax, others, that's local driven. That is decided by the local communities to do that for themselves. That's the appropriate place for sales tax additions to be implemented and assigned onto the property tax, or not property tax, the constituents and voters of that particular district. And you know what? A lot of this housing, it may be a state issue, but it's also a city issue. And it certainly should be something that is supported and addressed by the cities as well. And so it's just, again, for me, interesting that as a legislature that is responsible for the entire state, for setting the income tax rates and stuff for the entire state, for the property taxes on businesses and lake cabins across the state, we are now issuing sales tax for only a portion of the state. That does seem to be a little bit backwards from our responsibility, and I certainly would recommend a yes vote, and I support Representative Nash's motion.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, you've got a nearly $18 billion surplus. And the chair had a $1 billion target, and it was much larger in committee. And just as I had said that one day in committee, it was going to get pared down pretty aggressively. But $18 billion surplus, a $1 billion target. Now you're going to put this out at least $150 million or more every year. And the funny thing about these is once you put a tax like this on, it's incredibly difficult to get rid of it. And you said something, Mr. Chair, that I found curious. You did talk about that many of these folks that you're trying to help are paying, I believe you said, over 30% of their income towards housing. And I'm not sure your calculations were right, but they're going to be shopping. They're going to be doing things that create the removal of this from their wallets. And you're hoping to take care of them with the largesse that's being spread from your bill. But it's going to actually, I think, put them backwards, because if they have a family of any consequence, they're going to be buying things on a weekly, perhaps daily basis. If they have something delivered to their home, they're going to be paying that delivery tax as well. My question is, when does it stop? When does the notion that we'll just tax some more in the name of benefits, when does that end? When does that end? I don't see how this works long term. And again, Mr. Chair, you and I share a tremendously deep-held value to make sure that people have a place to live. I just can't support this. I think that the best thing that we could possibly do is strip this out and figure out how to redo the bill in conference committee. I just don't know that this is the thing that we want to tell people long term. Particularly, so I'm going to be in the county that this would be affected as well. I'm in Carver County. And I did some homework. I talked to a lot of people in Carver County because I see my constituents regularly. I don't know how they're going to buy off on this. I don't know how they're going to support this. And I talked to people in both sides of, well, there's now 3 districts that strand Carver County. I have talked to people in Representative Ream's district. They don't support this. I've spoken to people in Representative Harder's part of the county. They don't support this. Again, we all are concerned about how do we take care of people. But this is an unbelievably regressive tax that's ultimately going to wind up harming people. I don't know how to move forward with that. Would Representative Ream yield to a question?
Representative Ream will yield to a question. She will yield. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Ream, I would imagine you've spoken to people in your district and the other side of Carver County, and I don't know if you've spoken about this, but have you talked to people, and are you convinced that this is the pathway forward for them in their estimation to take on a tax imposed upon them to provide housing for themselves, quite possibly, that as they go to the Kowalskis near you, or if they go to the grocery stores in Chaska that we both share, or if they go to a grocery store in Chanhassen, the Byerly's that's there on Highway 5, do you feel that this is something that they believe that they should sign up for or have imposed upon them?
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Ream.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Nash. Yes, I have spoken to my constituents, and they are in favor of help for housing in my area. There are a number of people who have had to move out of my district because they cannot find affordable housing. A lot of older people aren't able to find affordable housing after their kids have grown and they're empty nesters, and they end up moving out of my district, unfortunately, because we can't find affordable housing for them. So yes, I have talked to them, and yes, they do feel a need for this.
Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess, Representative Ream, we are talking to different people in your side of the district. Members, this, again, an incredibly large budget that you have, a target. I think your last year's target was $100 million, and now we're at $1 billion. Astronomical growth. And on top of that, now you're going to impose a tax on the very people that you're trying to help. Members, I can't see how folks would support this, but I guess we're about to find out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I did have my roll call put on.
Representative Nash, you have requested a roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The clerk will take the roll on the 834 amendment. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail, and the 834 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Myers moves to amend House File Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A32.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Third time's a charm, and I'm going to request a roll call.
Representative Myers requests a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote. Representative Myers.
So this amendment may be deja vu for a lot of you. This is the amendment where we want to ensure that the voters that are going to be impacted by this sales tax that we've seen other places, have a voice. And this amendment will ask that we provide a referendum so that they have an opportunity to know how their money's going to be spent. And so I would ask members to support this amendment.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, members, I want to channel Representative Hornstein from earlier today. This is really a California amendment. Do we want to be like California? And so I would encourage a no vote. We're elected to make decisions, and I think we've been elected here to tackle our affordable housing crisis, and that's what this bill does.
I recognize the member from Waseca, Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And whereas it may seem like it's from California, got to remember that this really is a local option sales tax only initiated by the state. Okay, it's a local option sales tax. Guess what happens with all other local option sales tax here in the state? They have to go through by a referendum. It's what we claim as being and wanting people to have local control, local options for us to figure out what's going on. It makes sense that if somebody that the people that live in a particular city are going to have their taxes increased by somebody in the state level at least, that they ought to have an opportunity to say, yes, we agree with it or not. Remembering that what you're saying over on the other side is that this is best for the state and it's best for the city. Well, that's our opinion. And our opinion certainly is valid here, but it's not necessarily valid in the jurisdiction of those that are going to have the tax imposed. So it makes sense to have it as a referendum. It makes an opportunity for people to weigh in to actually verify whether or not what we think is best and what you think is best is the same as what they do. It makes sense for us to have local control. So it may seem like this is California if you want to use that example, but the point is local option sales tax, local option sales tax, local option sales tax is still locally voted on. And that's exactly what this is. We can claim it's something different because the state's doing it, but it is being assessed only in the local area in which it's that we're assigning it to. So please vote green on this amendment. Let's make sure that the people have an opportunity to say yes or no.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And while I would normally agree with Representative Howard and Representative Hornstein that we don't want to follow California's lead on policy matters, I don't think we should follow California's lead on tax policy or on regulatory policy. And generally speaking, we shouldn't follow California's lead when it comes to just opening the door willy-nilly to referenda. I do think we should make an exception when we're talking about raising taxes on Minnesotans in a time of a record surplus. I do think we should do that because, frankly, from the conversations I've had with Minnesotans, I think that Minnesotans were sold a bait and switch in the last election. I talked to a lot of folks across the state last fall. I talked to a lot of folks in my district. Remember, we had a projected $10 billion surplus in the fall. $10 billion. Then right after the election, it swelled to $17.5 billion. And I remember I was naive, and our new minority leader released a statement that said, $17.5 billion surplus, well, of course we shouldn't raise taxes. And I thought, why would we have to release a statement that we shouldn't raise taxes with a $17.5 billion surplus? Why would that be a partisan statement that we would release? Because members, I had a lot of conversations with folks in the fall, and with a $10 billion surplus, the overwhelming majority of those conversations were about how are we going to cut the burden of government on Minnesotans and give money back to Minnesotans. I talked to voters in my district. I talked to voters in Representative Wolgamott's district and Representative Stevenson's district and Representative Norris's district and Representative Bonner's district, a few other districts around the state. And I never once heard a single voter say, we need to raise the metro area sales tax. Didn't hear a single voter say that. So here we are today trying to represent the voters who put us here, who put the majority here by a very narrow majority. And I think it's important that if we're going to raise taxes, raise regressive sales taxes on the voters of the metro area, we ought to at least check with them on whether we heard them right in the last election. Because I don't think that what this body is doing today was hearing the people of Minnesota in the last election. It's definitely not hearing the voice of the voters in my district. My district is one of those districts that is right on the edge of the metro area as this is defined. So good news for the folks in my district, it's not very far to go to Elk River to shop. The bad news is for the businesses in my district, it's not very far to drive to Elk River to shop. So this is really gonna hurt a lot of businesses in the metro area, and it's gonna hurt a lot of folks in the metro area, and the people it's gonna hurt the most are the people who don't have a car to drive to Elk River, who don't have a car to drive to Delano, who don't have a car to drive to Hudson, Wisconsin. The people it's going to hurt the most are the people who their everyday necessities that they have to go out and pay sales tax on is going to go up by 1%, a 1% sales tax, along with all the other taxes that we're imposing on them in this body. So members, I think it's really important that we make an exception, and this one instance, to be like California, at least check with the voters before we start imposing new California-style sales taxes on them. I think this is a good amendment. Representative Myers, thank you for introducing this amendment, and I hope everyone votes yes on this amendment. Let's give the people of Minnesota, just double check with them on whether they think this is a good idea. I'm pretty sure I know why you don't want to take this amendment. It's because they're going to say no.
The author of the amendment, the member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we've talked about California a lot, and I don't really follow anything in California, but I was, looking on my phone here, and I guess they do really like referendums over there. Last 2022, they had 7. So it does sound like they have a tough time making decisions. Unlike Minnesota, I think our last one was 7 years ago. It was the Compensation Council. So we did one 7 years ago. They did 7 just last year. I think this is a good green vote to let the voters have an opportunity. It also is going to show the voters that, we're going to include them. We're going to make sure that, we try to narrow this divide. So I would ask everybody to vote green. Thanks.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail, and the 832 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson moves to amend House Bill number 2335, the third and gross one as amended. The amendment is coded A46.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, what this amendment does is require Minnesota Housing Finance Authority to come up with policies for grant making and grant oversight. Earlier this year, we had the OLA report on oversight of state-funded grants to nonprofits. And Minnesota Housing Finance Authority basically gives just about every dime they receive to nonprofits. We also, this last week, received the report from the OLA on Rent Help Minnesota. It was very critical of Minnesota Housing Finance Authority because they did things without having policies and procedures in place. We're talking over $1 billion. And I think we need to make sure that as these funds go out, they're being used properly, that there's oversight. We've seen in the past a lot of abuse and fraud from a number of nonprofits. There's still a number of investigations going on at this time. I'm not saying that these people that get the funds right now aren't doing things properly, but we don't know. So like I said, what this amendment does is require initial control procedures and objectives, requires policies regarding grantee standards and grant criteria, procedures for ensuring all documentation is received from the grant applicants, and procedures for regularly auditing grant awards, grant payments to ensure payment is accurate. I'm hoping that you'll accept this amendment, Chair Howard, because I think it's something that we need to do. I know in Ways and Means you started that process with an amendment there, but I think this is a process, this helps finish that process to make sure that the grants are being used properly.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, oversight, accountability is important. As you mentioned, we did add an amendment that has been vetted and worked on in good bipartisan fashion that's in this bill. And so that helps us move the conversation forward. For that reason, I would encourage a no vote on this amendment.
The author of the amendment, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, Chair Howard, I'm disappointed because there's nothing in that amendment that was added in Ways and Means that requires this stuff. Members, please vote yes.
All those in favor of adopting the 846 amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail, and the 846 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson moves to amend House File Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A25.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, what this amendment is for the safety of our kids. Safety of the individuals living in apartment complexes. Safety of the kids in neighborhoods that have rental units. What this amendment does is if a person commits certain crimes, that they can lose their rental assistance. If somebody in that unit is selling drugs, commits violent crimes, that the renters lose their issues. This is a little bit important to me because when my wife worked in property management as an accountant, they had a person her boyfriend move in. Was never on the lease, was never vetted by the property management company. A few weeks later, sexually assaulted a 12-year-old girl. He was a sex offender. I think it's important that we make sure our kids are safe by making sure that if serious crimes are happening in these units and the tenant that's on the lease is allowing them to be there or allowing the crime to happen. The selling of narcotics, including fentanyl, which is one of the most deadliest drugs out there right now, that they lose their subsidy. They don't deserve it. They're putting others at risk for being there. I want to make sure our kids are safe, and because of that, I am going to request a roll call on this amendment.
Representative Johnson requests a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote. Representative Johnson.
Please support this. I think it's important for the safety of our kids.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to recommend a no vote on this particular amendment. The problem with this is that it does not keep our kids safe. The problem here is that you're punishing the kids who actually are victims. If they are living in the household where this person has committed a horrific crime against them, you're actually kicking that child and perhaps their mother out of the household. The same thing is true for domestic violence victims. If there's a victim of domestic violence and the perpetrator has been convicted of that crime, the victim of domestic violence is the one who's actually going to lose housing for her and for her children. This is nothing really but a victim-blaming amendment, and for that reason, I'm going to recommend a no vote.
The author of the amendment, Representative Johnson.
No, Mr. Speaker, members, I'm really sorry about what I've just said. Because if the person that is on the lease is allowing the sale of fentanyl from their apartment, they're not only putting the kids living in that apartment in danger, they're letting everybody in that apartment complex in danger. If they're allowing illegal activity that endangers people, why should the state of Minnesota and the citizens allow that to continue to happen? I want to protect our kids. I want to protect those kids that are in that apartment. It also keeps our community safe. This is about the safety of the kids. It's that important. Please vote green.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm really astounded by what was just said, that this was really attacking victims. I'm astounded by that statement. In our experience, we've actually seen where, and I don't know if there's coercion even, where a lot of times the girlfriend usually the girlfriend will lease out the apartment, and then 2 weeks later, the drug-dealing boyfriend moves in, and the housing provider is stuck holding the bag. And I've seen children in those situations, and no child should be in that household. They're being exposed to not only drug dealing, but a lot of the things that go with that. It's a very dangerous situation for a child. And I know of law enforcement people that have gone and had to remove children out of those circumstances where drugs or other things are going on that are illegal, where it's unsafe for a child. Those children are in need of protection. And we certainly should be ending the rental assistance of anyone that is violating the law. they should lose that benefit. And if they're allowing some of that stuff to happen, and their child is right there, or child or children are exposed to that, then the child probably should be removed from the home. That's not a safe environment for a child. Vote for the Johnson amendment. It only makes common sense.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, members, just to be clear, if somebody beats up their girlfriend, convicted of domestic violence, she gets kicked out of the apartment. He pulls a knife, he stabs her, she gets kicked out of the apartment. Her kids get kicked out of the apartment if they're living in the apartment together. Mr. Speaker, is there a roll call that's been requested on this?
There is a roll call. Representative Pinto.
Good, thank you. Thank you so much. I would certainly urge that folks do not want to be on record on that. Vote no. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, this is designed to make sure that those things do not happen. To make sure that people are not committing crimes in their apartments. That the mothers make sure their boyfriends aren't selling drugs out of their house to protect their kids. In a domestic situation, more than likely that person that did the assault is going to have an ex parte order and they can't be there. Guess what? There's ways to work this that they don't lose their rent or their subsidy. It's the person that lives there, if they are the ones. We need to make sure our kids are safe. By allowing drug dealers to stay, are you keeping the kids safe? That's the question you have to ask yourself. We've already had across this country where kids playing in parks are getting exposed to fentanyl. We need to make sure our kids are safe in their homes, walking the hallways in their apartment complex, on the playground at that complex. We need to make people think about who they have in their apartments, who they're living with. I want the kids safe. Please vote green.
The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 54 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail and the 825 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson moves to amend House Bill number 2335, the third engrossment. The amendment is coded A18.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, what this amendment does is requires that the grantee or the grantor must conduct site visits to assess for any items of concern and set up things to make sure that the grantee's financial standards and management is being done, basically to make sure that the grant is being used for what its purpose. And the grantor shall report to the legislature no later than 15 days, or no later than the 15th of January of the following year, the document in review. With that, I would request a yes vote.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would encourage a no vote. Again, we did include some added language related to grant management, and there's already a lot of that happens anyway. But I would encourage us to vote this down. We do have the fully vetted grant management language that's in each budget bill in this bill, and so I'd encourage a no vote.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Johnson.
Members, please vote in favor of this amendment.
All those in favor of adopting the A18 amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail, and the A18 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson moves to amend House Law Number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A20.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, maybe we'll have a little better luck this time. One thing that I've always been concerned about is making sure that we have wraparound services, especially for our homeless. What this amendment does is require that grantees provide that wraparound service to families receiving rental assistance, including financial management and educational training in regards to financial literacy, life skills training, education and training on job and search skills, and assist recipients to access opportunities for further education, including education and training to meet high school equivalent standards, helping them learn English as a second language, mental health, assisting them with mental health services and referrals, and assisting families, including parenting classes, homework help, and assisting with early childhood programs. If we do this, we can help them get out of the situation they're in, not having to keep assisting them, but making them a better person. In my church, I'm the deacon, and I am responsible for dealing with those who call for help. And one of the things that I talk to them about is what is their plan to get out of this situation. And a lot of times in talking to them, we're able to do a little bit of help. Our church is small, doesn't have a lot of funds. But we're also able to send them or advise them someplace to get some assistance in life skills, in training, in job skills, which makes them a better person, makes them be able to get out of the situation they're in. And without these wraparound services, all we're doing is giving them a handout. A handout keeps a person down. It doesn't make them better. The reason I do things the way I do as helping those at my church, because I want to give them a hand up. Help them out of their situation and help them to become a better person. And by doing this, what's in this amendment will help them be a better person and give them some pride in themselves and be a productive citizen of this state and this country. I don't want to keep them down by giving them a handout. I want to bring them up by giving them a hand up. Please support this amendment.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, I do appreciate many of the wraparound services that are called out in this amendment. We do want to make sure that things like this are available and more accessible for folks. A lot of these things are funded in Representative Keeler's Pathway Home Act that we're going to pass. But I am going to encourage a no vote. The way this amendment is drafted is it would restrict some of the uses we want in the FHPAP program to help prevent homelessness for families. For that reason, I would encourage a no vote.
The author of the amendment, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, Chair Howard, I'm disappointed again. I have an amendment that'll actually help people, which Minnesota Housing Committee was trying to do. And now we're saying we're not going to help them by giving them the services they need. Yes, you have in the bill a section that gives $1.5 million for that. But that doesn't even scratch the surface of what we need. That doesn't even consider, I wouldn't even consider that a pilot project. And it's, if I remember correctly, I have to look it up again, but I think it's very local to a small area. Members, let's help these people. Let's help them, give them a hand up and not a handout. Please vote for the amendment.
All those in favor of adopting the 820 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail and the 820 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson moves to amend House Law number 2335, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A36.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, this is the last amendment. This one is also important to the state of Minnesota, especially greater Minnesota, outside the 7-county metro area.
36.
This requires that 30% of the appropriations in this bill go outside the 7-county metro area. The reason I brought this amendment forward is I was going through the bills and reading the Minnesota state statutes and all these grants that we have. Each different grant, most of them require only one grant given outside the 7-county metro area. One. I ended up looking up the 2020 census, added up the population of the 7-county metro area, subtracted it from what the Minnesota population was after the 2020 census. Guess what? 47% of the state population does not live in the 7-county metro area. Only 53% do. Yet, in this bill and the way the statutes are currently written, out of all these grants and all these different grant programs, most of them only require one to go to greater Minnesota. We have a $17.5 billion surplus, over $1 billion going into this program. About half the population living outside the 7-county metro area, and the vast majority of the funds in this bill go to the 7-county metro area, mostly the 2 counties, I would imagine it's going to end up. But this is important to the entire state. Housing issues are not limited to Minneapolis and St. Paul, Hennepin and Ramsey County, or the other 5 collar counties. We have issues all over the state. There's problems in Duluth, Moorhead, Wilmer, Rochester, Winona. My church helps out with a number of homeless families in my community. But yet only one grant has to go outside by statute the 7-county metro area. And in this amendment, it only requires 30%. Not 47% like the population is, just 30%. Give us some help. That's all we're asking. I do ask for a yes vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Johnson. I would encourage a no vote. I would offer for the body that Minnesota Housing actually does do quite a good job of regional balance with their allocation of resources. If you look at their distribution of the challenge program or housing infrastructure bonds, or this program for this amendment, FHPAP, you'll see that there is quite a bit of regional balance. I checked with Minnesota Housing. Last year, FHPAP spent 55% of its resources in the 7-county metro and 45% in greater Minnesota. So I just don't think this is necessary, and I would encourage a no vote.
The author of the amendment, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, Chair Howard. Chair Howard, you just answered why we should do it. You said they spent 45% in greater Minnesota on some of these different programs. So let's change it to a minimum 30% instead of just one grant. It's not going to affect everything if Minnesota Housing Finance is doing it already. But let's get it in law that needs to be more than one. That's all I'm asking. Please vote yes.
All those in favor of adopting the 836 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail, and the 836 amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended.
Third reading, House File Number 2335, as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to House File 2335. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I just want to say thank you to Chair Howard. He has had a very clear vision from the beginning of how he's wanting to do housing in Minnesota this year, and working with him to ensure that more Minnesotans have safe, stable, and dignified housing has been a true honor. I also want to thank our tremendous staff. Chair went through all their names earlier today, but it's been a pleasure to work with DFL, GOP, and nonpartisan staff on this important issue. And then finally, I do want to thank the members of the committee. We had very many spirited discussions, but I hope that we all learn from each other as we move towards the goal of housing more Minnesotans. So there are a number of provisions that I could talk about in this bill, but the one that may be quite transformational is the new funding program to support first-generation homebuyers. These are people who have not owned a home, do not have a parent who has owned a home, or either them or their parent may have lost a home to foreclosure. The assistance in this bill, along with homebuyer education, are critical tools for opening home ownership to more people across Minnesota, especially in communities of color. And this pilot program is intended to improve our state's racial home ownership gap. The lack of sufficient down payment assistance is part of the reason why Minnesota has, unfortunately, the 5th largest racial home ownership gap in the country. And should this program be enacted, we could see significant closure in that gap. And we know that the disparities across Minnesota are stark because they were intentionally enacted throughout our history to create barriers to home ownership for Black and brown households. So solutions to that injustice must also be intentional. This bill has an investment of $150 million for down payment assistance that will support close to 4,000 first-generation homebuyers over the next 3 years. This provision and many others in HF 2335 are a much-needed first step towards the significant investments we still need in housing in Minnesota. I hope that this bill sets the standard for the type of investment we need and is a new level from which we can continue to grow. To ensure that more Minnesotans have access to safe, stable, and dignified housing, members, please vote green.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I will echo what Representative Agbaje said. We did have some really solid conversations. Sometimes it got a little spirited, but I want to talk about one time, and it was in markup, that we all had a really great opportunity. It was when I offered the amendment to require translation services when we are asking people to sign a contract for housing. And Representative Hassan, there she is, I really appreciate the fact that we talked about that really early in session. And I said, you know what, I would like to make this happen because I feel very strongly that if we're going to ask people to sign a contract that they are going to be held liable to, that they should understand in their native language what's in front of them. And Vice Chair Agbaje, I appreciated the kind words in committee because to me, it's not an unreasonable request, and I'm glad that we were able to find the room, Mr. Chair, in the bill. And members, you've heard me talk before about the value of the word home. Home is an incredibly powerful word. You're having a bad day, say, I'm going home. And home is where your people are. Home is where your friend, always happy to see you dog is. Home is where great things happen, birthdays, anniversaries, babies are brought home to home. Home is incredibly powerful. And I've said it a number of times, and I said it earlier this evening, there are homes that we rent, and there are homes that we buy. Please never think that I feel other than that. We've had some times where that wasn't always the conversation point, but the goal of this housing committee, and I've been a housing advocate for a very long time, and this is my first time on the committee, and I came with a lot of expectations that we could have conversations like the chair has agreed to have in the interim. Because home is a powerful word that gives people great strength. A stable home helps people who have families create stability for their children, themselves. They can get a better job. They can lift themselves up. And I argue that a stable home also imparts tremendous benefit to the cities that those people happen to live in. And Representative Cha, you and I talked about that in committee. I feel passionately about housing. It is incredibly detailed. There's a lot of moving parts, but at its core is you open that door, you walk in, you can leave the world behind you. Your people are there to cheer you on or buck you up or say, you know what, tomorrow's going to be better. That's what this is all about. But I think we're missing the mark on this bill, Mr. Chair, and you know what I'm about to say. Minnesota has the absolute worst housing inventory in the country. And there was an article that both Representative Elkins and I contributed to last year in backgrounding information that was put out by Webster in the Star Tribune. There are national organizations and the local paper and people from all parts of the country who say, Minnesota, you need to build more houses. And Mr. Chair, we didn't even have some of our builders come in and do the walkthroughs that we had talked about. They didn't get that opportunity this year in committee. That is an essential part to the quadratic equation example that I use so frequently. And we know that we need the builders to build more homes, both multi-housing and single family, and maybe that duplex that we're going to get done soon. Why did we not have them come in to talk? If they're an integral part of this conversation and we didn't bring them in, why? Why? Because they're the ones who, for so many Minnesotans, are building what I call that North Star. And for those that weren't here previously last year, I have 6 kids. Some of them are out of the house, and we both celebrate that at times, and we miss them terribly. But our oldest boys refer to our home as the North Star. So as our kid that was in the Navy was overseas on a deployment, he always knew that his home was there waiting for him if he needed it, that his family was there, and that he could, like all good sailors do, Representative Bliss is gone, all good sailors can navigate home by the North Star. That's how powerful this is. We have to get this right, members. Apartments are a huge part of this. Twin homes are a part of this. Multi-housing, big apartment buildings are a part of this, but so are the single-family houses. And Mr. Chair, I'm bummed that we didn't have that time to hear from the various builders that would have loved to have come in, because they're part of this too. That's part of this too. And if you've ever driven out into my district, the argument that I made earlier about putting up buildings that are going to meet the need, come visit with me, Mr. Chair. I'll buy you lunch, and we'll go visit the city of Mayer. City of Mayer has starter homes. We're not building enough of those starter homes, and I think you and I agree. There's no room for debate on that. We're lockstep. We agree we're not building enough. But we have to make it easy for them to build, and I don't think we are. We didn't really tackle that issue very much. I will say that there were a lot of good things that happened in committee, some in bills, some in conversations. I think that a lot of folks, I had several people that were watching, and they said, you and the other side agree on a lot of these things, and the pathway home is sometimes a little different on how we want to get there. But in all the things that we do down here, I think that this is one of the things that we probably have the most agreement on. But I'm disappointed in the spending, and I'm disappointed that when the target that you were given wasn't enough, that's when we saw, I think, a couple of days within the announcement of your target, that you dropped your bill for the local tax. It's a regressive tax. It's going to hurt people. And those people are the ones that you wanted to help. So I can't support the bill, Mr. Chair. There are things in the bill that I think are really good ideas. And we heard from so many people that came to committee that even they recognize that there was a need to talk about some regulatory reform. And I hope that we can do that. I know Representative Elkins and I feel passionately about this. We have to get that part done as well. But this bill is incredible spending over the last biennium's target, and it's really not solving as many parts of the equation that it should. There are some things in here that will be for housing starts, but we didn't really dive into that very deeply at all, Mr. Chair. So, again, consider the amazing power of the word home. And I'm not trying to be trite. I'm not raising my voice tonight. I've dedicated a lot of my time here at the Capitol on housing issues. I dedicated some of my time over the summer on what I think, Chair Howard, was probably the hottest stupid day of the year, trying to build other people's homes at a Habitat for Humanity. And I would invite every member, every side of the aisle. We can work on this together, Mr. Chair. We should have well, we'll excuse the Senate, but we should have every member of the House of Representatives in the state of Minnesota at a job site for Habitat. It is transformational, absolutely transformational. We broke for lunch. The family that was moving into the house that had just been finished came over, and I gotta tell you, the story was amazing. I don't even think I ate most of my lunch. I just wanted to listen to how this house that is their home was gonna change their life. That's a success story. That's a success story that we should all get behind. But I think we missed the mark on looking at the overall problem. You looked at part of the scope of the problem, but there was a bunch of stuff that was left on the other side of where you ended that really deserved to have some money spent on this or have some regulations changed. So again, I do get very passionate and compassionate around housing. Our people need us to get this right. The entire state of Minnesota needed us to get this right. And I feel like we fell well short. So I'll be voting no. I would encourage members to vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise tonight in support of one of the best housing bills that this chamber has ever seen. I want to first thank my chair, Chair Howard, whose passion and dedication for housing stemmed through all of the bills that we have had. I also want to thank Vice Chair Agbaje, who is my sister in arms, who understands my pain when I talk about home ownership. I have been here only 5 years, and every single time I stood up to talk about housing, I talk about only two things, and members may know this: tenant rights, home ownership. I understand housing is a spectrum. We have to make sure people who are unhoused have a place to lay their head. We have to make sure that there's transitional housing, that there is affordable housing, that there is homes people can purchase that are affordable and they can own. Rep. Nash and I agree on many things when it comes to housing, but we also have our disagreements. You just said that we missed the mark on this bill. I am extremely excited to vote green on this bill tonight. When I first got elected in 2019, Aisha and I, Rep. Gomez and I have the same district, Senate district, and housing is a real issue in our district. We both were really interested in housing, and we advocated to have a housing committee that has its own budget. We were extremely excited about that, but disappointed when we only got $10 million for a budget. $10 million. This bill that's in front of us tonight invests over $1 billion in housing, in the whole spectrum of housing. So to say that we missed the mark on this is really flaw, I would say. This is a great bill, and I'm going to talk about the home ownership in this bill. So one of the bills that I was carrying is the fee-based home ownership. And the reason why this came about, I want to thank Molly Peterson, who did a lot, thank you, a lot of work to get this bill and shape it in a way that was possible, understandable, and that was also within the statute of what we can do. I read a story maybe it was last year, I can't remember when it was. I read a story on Sahan Journal and NPR about people doing what is called contract for deed. So as you know, the Muslim community does not like to take loans that have interest. So then people find out about contracts for deed. There's no interest. and it was lucrative, right? But what people didn't know is contracts for deed is the wild, wild west. There are no rules. People can, game you and give you a loan that you have no idea what the terms are. One of the biggest surprises for many of the people who were getting a contract for deed was something called balloon payments. So you purchase a house, you're not purchasing a house, technically you're renting the house because the house doesn't belong to you until you pay it all off. But you do a hefty down payment. We're talking about $100,000, $120,000. A hefty down payment for a house that's not yours. And then a year later, they say, oh, it's time to collect that balloon payment. And the balloon payments are $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. So for somebody who collected money, $100,000 for a family who is not wealthy, who are barely making it, who may have collected this money from family members and people that they know, just to find out owning a home is really tedious work and it's expensive, to find out that you have to pay something else at the end of the year called balloon payment, and if you don't do it, you lose the house. And guess what? Because it's not your house and it's under your name, it doesn't go through the foreclosure process, it's an eviction process. Boom, you're homeless. That happened to many families. And one of the guys that his story stood with me was a guy who had a family of 6 or 7, I can't remember, who paid $300,000 and was still homeless at the end of the day because he couldn't afford the balloon payment. So after working with our staff and Molly Peterson, we came up with what's called a fee-based home ownership. And I wish we could have spent more money on that, but I'm okay with what the chair gave me. Thank you, Chair Howard. Home ownership is the cornerstone of generational wealth. It stabilizes neighborhood. It even increases children doing well at school. That's what the research says. Kids their families are homeowners and live in a stabilized neighborhood do better in school. And we all want our kids to do better in school, right? Everybody wants kids to do better. So if we want to, close the education gap, maybe we should invest in more home ownership programs. We should invest in stabilizing people's homes. I know it's late at night, and I don't want to stand here and talk about this all night, but if you don't remember anything about my speech tonight, just remember fifth place. Minnesota has the 5th largest disparities in home ownership between whites and non-whites. 5th largest disparity in the country. It's only maybe 4 other states or so that are worse than we are. But it's also a great state that has ample of resources, that has surplus all the time, well, at least while I have been here. Why is it that we have a terrible home ownership rates? Well, with redlining, bias lending practices, systemic racism, and many more barriers, that's the reason why. So tonight, members, I want us to rewrite many wrongs by investing in our communities across the state. The communities that we left behind. Our former chair of housing, Chair Hassman, I hope she's watching tonight, used to say, nothing goes right if someone doesn't have a place to lay their head at night. Nothing else goes right in your life if you have to worry about where am I going to sleep tonight. You can't have, good health. You can't have a job, stable job. You can't have a great education if you constantly have to worry about where am I going to sleep tonight. And also, former President Jim Carter said, housing is human rights, basic human rights. And he goes on to say, I don't see how a family can enjoy other human rights like freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the right to vote, when a family live in a disputable place of which they are ashamed of and makes their family values lower their standard of ethical and moral values. So people can't even, have higher standard moral values if they're ashamed of where they live or if they didn't have a place to live. Let's make sure that everybody has a place to lay their head that's safe, secure, and stable. Let's push green to restore hope for many Minnesotans, and thank you.
Representative Cha.
Thank you, Speaker. Today, I stand to speak for the first time because housing is important to me. I'm a refugee from a war called the Secret War of Laos, which happened during the Vietnam War. I came to America when I was 4 years old because of the Catholic charities of Iowa decided to sponsor my family because we're Christians. By faith, I'm Christian. We moved to Minnesota in around 1980, St. Paul. I grew up on Cathedral Hill, the Rondo neighborhood, and in Frogtown in the 80s, when the Belmont Strip Club was still on Dale University. And my address was 495 and a half Dell North. If you didn't know that, that was the second story of the Belmont Strip Club. Yes, that's where Representative Cha grew up, on that second story multi-use building on Dell and University. If it wasn't for the investment of the Minnesota legislator in the state of Minnesota during that time, refugees like myself and other Hmong refugees and Southeast Asian refugees from that part of the region would not have stable housing. We would not have Section 8, we would not have housing assistance programs, and Mont Airy and the McDonough Homes, Project Homes. Then the 9 Hmong legislator in the state of Minnesota would not be here at the Capitol because we are descendants of those families, and half of us are refugees from that war. Today, there are 9 Hmong legislators at the Minnesota State House, more than any other state. In fact, we are the only Hmong legislator in the United States of America. And that is because of the investment that Minnesota made into my community, is why I am here in front of you in this chair. Housing disparity was so important to my family that I became a mortgage broker, I became a realtor and a real estate investor. These programs that we're putting together in housing, first-time home buyer, education, credit repair. My mom, a non-speaking English refugee who studied for 3 years to get her citizenship so that she could vote, along with my dad, enroll in an SHRA program so that she can qualify for a down payment assistance from Wells Fargo so that she could buy us our first house. That is why these housing programs are important. It is because of that house that allowed me and my brothers and sisters to get an education. It changed the educational outcome, the trajectory of our careers, our health, and our social status. I've lived in many places. I moved to Woodbury in 1996, for those of you that don't know that. I invested in Woodbury when Woodbury was still a very small city. And yes, I did spend some time in California. But I went through that mortgage crisis, the meltdown. I was a broker. I lost my business. I lost my career. But I didn't give up because housing is important. We always talk about California. I lived in California for almost 20 years, but I lived in Minnesota for 26. And so when you live in California and you're going through a housing crisis, I've lived in the Valley. I've lived in the Bay Area, where your lease is $5,000 a month for a 1,500 square foot home, okay? I've lived in the Valley. Yes, and now I live in Woodbury. But there's a starting point to my journey that allowed me to get here. And I'll be the first to tell you 100% that it was the investment in housing that got Ethan Cha to the state legislature. It is housing, an investment in housing, that got 9 Hmong immigrant refugee state legislators to the Capitol. I want to thank you, Chair Howard, and the rest of the committee. I want to thank you, Nash, for your amendments. You know, the story you told about your kids not being able to afford houses. I love your idea about, you know, the 5 families buying 5 properties on the lake. I'm all for that. And that amendment about contracts being translated in languages. I'm going to add one more thing that some of you may not know about Asian families. We don't believe in debt. We don't believe in mortgages. And debt goes with us to the afterlife. And so as new Americans, we had to adjust to what a FICO score was and to what a 30-year mortgage meant to us. But we're here today. We're part of this community. We pay our taxes, and we're making a difference for everyone in the state of Minnesota. So thank you, Chair Howard. Thank you to all the members of the Housing Committee. Let's vote green.
The member for Mysantee, Representative Johnson.
Madam Chair, members, it's been a long night. We'll get this over shortly. I won't speak too long. But before I start, there's some people I want to thank. First of all, I want to thank the staff on the Housing Committee. Adam Kopel, Abdullah, and Lori Coutinho. Without them, we'd had a rough time getting things done. Chair Howard, Vice Chair Agbaje, I want to thank you for the work that you've done and working with me at times. Butting heads at times as well. But overall, I think we had a good committee. Now, there's some good things in this bill. We did what the coach wanted us to do. Got the changes to workforce housing grants from a 75% match to a 50% match. It helps in greater Minnesota. Workforce housing is a huge issue across this state. We have many areas of the state that have jobs available. A lot of them are specialty jobs. They find somebody that can actually do the work, but there's no place for them to live. And our housing stock is so low, there's no place for them to buy. And it takes time to buy a home. So I want to thank you for doing that. Now, we had a budget this year, $1 billion increase. Over $1 billion for housing. It's unheard of. Last biennium, our target was $126 million. We had an 848% increase in the budget. 848%. And it was divided up a few different ways. Homeownership got a total of $169,294 million. 15% of the budget for people to help people buy new homes. Of that, $150 million went to one nonprofit who's going to give it to other nonprofits to dish out. $115 million to give to a nonprofit to give to other nonprofits. We had a oversight of nonprofit organizations OLA report. And one of the issues that they had was lack of control and lack of oversight, especially in the named nonprofit area. Yet we give $150 million to a named nonprofit. Makes me wonder. We have $643,410 towards rental units. Granted, that is also the rental assistance, but also to build new rental units, new Section 8 housing. That's 60% of the budget. So we're at 75% of the budget. And there's some other things here and there. But what's really disheartening is the Greater Minnesota Workforce Funds. Yes, it was increased, $40 million. To a total of 4.6% of the budget. 4.6% of the budget in Greater Minnesota, where 47% of the population lives, has been screaming for workforce housing help. Because we have a lot of jobs, a lot of good paying jobs, but no place for any of them to live if they take the job. And here's the saddest part. The things we did to reduce the cost of a home, not a rental unit, but actual home. Zero. Absolutely zero. We know that across this area, Minnesota, it costs more to build a home than our surrounding states, and by thousands of dollars. Yet we didn't even discuss it. Oh, I take that back. We did discuss Representative Nash's bill dealing with it, but we did nothing in this bill. Oh, that's right, we did. We added a new sales tax, 0.25%. I just added up the numbers for next biennium. That sales tax will bring in $379 million, over double last year's target. So apparently where the sales tax is going to cover all the, is going to be the budget target for next biennium. It's disappointing. Now, with this $1 billion, it can have been used in different ways. One way it could have been used is we could have taken half of it and used to help our nursing homes. Our nursing homes could actually use $500,000 or $500 million to help them out. But we went to rental units for nonprofits to run and to hand out the money, to build. I've looked at some of the 990s by some of these nonprofits, and it's surprising the assets they have. $200 million in assets, yet we're giving them more money. If you have $200 million worth of assets, you can get a loan to build another complex. You don't need state tax dollars. Another thing that's concerning, I don't know if nobody even talked about it. They removed the debt ceiling for Minnesota Housing Finance. You heard me, they removed the debt ceiling. It was $5 billion. They're at right around 2.8 right now of debt at the taxpayer's expense. But we just removed the debt ceiling in this bill. Moved it to just general obligation bonds, which takes 2/3 majority of this body to pass. But Minnesota Housing Finance can do HIB bonds without any action by this committee or by this body. Very disappointing, very concerning. Then we have another issue in the bill, and it was talked about earlier, the first generation and first-time home buyers. And they even gave one of the definitions. A person who's never owned a home, yes, that would be a first-time home buyer. But lost it in foreclosure? That'd be a second-time home buyer. During the housing bubble, I had both the honor and the unfortunate issue of serving foreclosure papers. There's a number of them. I felt very bad for them because it wasn't their spending that caused the foreclosure. It might have been their loss of their job, and they're doing everything they could, working with the banks, and most of them did get it worked out. But then we had the other ones. You drive up. Before I'd get there, I'd always read the foreclosure papers. Oh, they haven't paid their mortgage for 7 months. Drive in the yard, brand new Escalade, brand new large inboard, outboard boat, a couple brand new ATVs, a couple brand new snowmobiles, another fishing boat. They were paying those off, but they weren't paying their mortgage. That hurt you and me. I didn't feel sorry for them at all. Maybe they should have had the classes I tried to get into the bill to understand what it is to be a homeowner. Now, another issue I have. There's $10 million given to another named nonprofit in this bill. They needed the money because of deferred maintenance, because they didn't have the funds to do the maintenance they wanted. In committee, we questioned down a little more, and the reason they didn't have the maintenance funded, because they had $7 million in lost revenue from non-payment of rent. $7 million in non-payment of rent. Apparently, the people didn't fill out the paperwork they needed to get that funds to the nonprofit through the program of the federal government, but it was $7 million. And I don't know if Chair Howard ever learned of this or not, but that same nonprofit in your bill received over $3.5 million from Hennepin County in a grant because of the non-payment of rent. So now they're not just $10 million, they're getting over $13.5 million in grants for deferred maintenance. But those who actually privately own rental units, they don't get a dime. This is all nonprofit owned property or that's receiving all this funding. Like I say, it's disappointing. There's some good money in here as well to help those that are in need that are homeless. But unfortunately, because an amendment wasn't taken tonight, it's a handout keeping them down, not a hand up helping them. This bill needs a lot of work. It could be a lot better. It doesn't help much in greater Minnesota. It does wonders to help those and keep them down in Minnesota or in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Members, this bill needs a lot more work. Let's send it back to get it done right, to help those in need, to get them out of their situation, helping the rest of Minnesota in their situations, and make this bill better. Please vote no on this bill.
The member from Hennepin, the author of the bill, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I am incredibly excited and honored to be authoring this bill and doing this work with all of you and with Minnesotans to pass the most transformational housing bill this legislature has ever seen. It is going to do so much good for so many people. If you want to reduce childhood poverty, vote for this bill. If you want to improve the equity gaps in our schools, vote for this bill. If you want to give a key to thousands of Minnesotans to open that door to their home that they own for the very first time, vote for this bill. If you want to make Minnesota a place where everyone has a safe and affordable place to lay their head at night, we take that step tonight, a big step forward, by voting for this bill. Members, please join me and vote yes.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 57 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 917. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 917, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to housing, the second engrossment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. So we are going to continue on with one more bill to protect housing rights in Minnesota. House File 917 is a package of important tenant right measures to address the needs that have beleaguered renters for many years in Minnesota. Renters make up 30% of the households across the state, and in our most populous cities, renters are close to or more than 50% of the households. Renting, especially for those who are low or middle income, can sometimes be a precarious way to live if your landlord is one that is absent, doesn't follow through with their end of the bargain, or does not have the skills to be a landlord. Similarly, if you end up in court because of a dispute, the landlord is often at an advantage over the tenant, and the tenant is limited in the ways that they can hold landlords accountable. This bill package addresses that by spelling out a tenant's rights and the rights of the landlord in certain situations. So some of the highlights of this bill include prohibiting housing discrimination based on your source of income, a right to counsel in public housing for a breach of lease case. It allows tenants to bring counterclaims and defenses without first paying the disputed amount in court. This bill also includes much-needed reforms in the eviction court process to better ensure that tenants have a clear understanding of the allegations against them and where they can receive help. We also require a 14-day notice for evictions as the minimum standard across the state so that tenants and landlords have time to negotiate or mediate before things escalate to the courthouse. We also allow expungements of eviction records so that tenants can more readily move on after an eviction. And finally, this bill keeps eviction court records non-public until there has been a final judgment. What this package does is outlines the best practices that many of our landlords are already implementing with their tenants, like entering at a reasonable time, keeping the heat at a comfortable temperature during the winter months, offering move-in and move-out inspections, and disclosing fees. And overall, this bill will seek to balance the power dynamics between landlords and renters. The changes presented here are a culmination of hours of work between varied bill authors in this room and stakeholders, including supporters and those who were not very supportive. So I'm grateful for the trust that the bill authors have had in me to carry this forward and ensure that we are creating a fairer space where landlords and tenants can work together to prevent evictions and the loss of housing. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and with that, we'll go to amendments.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Agbaje moves to amend House Law Number 917, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A6.
Representative Agbaje, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment extends out the effective dates in the bill, which allows for more time for both landlords and tenant to update their leases, forms, and get the information out to the public. So we'll be making it effective January 1, 2024.
Any discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moves to amend House Law Number 917, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A7.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One of the provisions in this bill is the expungement after 3 years. As a housing provider myself for basically since we've moved here 27 years ago, one of the things that we use is a background check company. And the background check companies check for past evictions. They check for credit scores and the like. The credit or the eviction notices that they check for goes back 7 years. It can only go back 7 years. And again, as was alluded to earlier, the provision in this bill says after 3 years, an eviction will be expunged. And what my amendment does is say, I don't think that 3 years is quite long enough to prove that you have a good record in paying your rent and abiding by all of the rules of a lease that you've signed. And so this moves it to 5 years. I think it's a very reasonable amount of time for both the tenant to prove themselves and for the housing providers to have a look back and take into consideration someone's past rental history in this area. So I would encourage a green vote.
Discussion to the amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I think everybody knows how I feel about tenant laws and updating our tenant laws. No one should be punished for not being able to pay their rent forever. 7 years is a long time, and sometimes evictions stay on your record forever. There are thousands of reasons why someone cannot pay rent, but criminalizing poverty is what eviction is. The number one reason why people are homeless is evictions, and 90% of evictions are lack of payment. And why do people not pay? They lost their job, a family member got sick, something, a circumstance out of their control happened. So how long do we punish people for not being able to pay rent? 90% of evictions are because people can't pay rent. Here's a fun fact. Our criminal record expungement timelines are for felonies, we have 5 years. And for misdemeanors, we have 2 to 5 years, depending on the severity of the misdemeanor. So changing this expungement from 3 years to 5 years criminalizes poverty and punishes people for being poor. Please vote no.
Further discussion, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, that's hogwash. Representative Hassan. That's hogwash. This is for 5 years. It's not for 7. We're not criminalizing poverty. We want people to be accountable for their actions. It's a contract between 2 parties. That's what a lease is. Please vote green.
All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House Bill number 917, as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to the bill. Are you kidding me? The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, I stand in opposition to this bill. There's numerous problems with it, but we're short on time. This bill makes it more difficult for housing providers to actually provide housing. Makes it less likely that they would want to provide housing. In fact, earlier I had a news article sent out done by NPR about an apartment complex in Duluth. Guess what? Because of some of the things we're just talking about down here, things in this bill, they're changing from an apartment complex to a hotel, reducing the number of available apartments in the city of Duluth. I've also talked to some of my housing providers in my community. They're also considering changing over from apartment to condominium. Again, reducing the availability of the rental units in the community. Unfortunately, we have to look at the unintended consequences of some of the things we do. Unfortunately, with this bill, I think it's going to have the opposite effect than what the plan is for it. So be careful what you pass, because you might not like the outcome. Members, please vote no on this.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, in the interest of time, I was ready to defend a lot of portions of this bill, but here we are. So I will just say that people really need housing, they need stability, and they need to be able to hold our landlords accountable. This bill does that. Vote green.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 57 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no action, if there is no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Altendorf and others introduced House Resolution number 3, a House concurrent resolution denouncing the horrors of socialism.
So,
Concurrent resolution is being referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
announcements. The member from Hennepin, Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll make a quick announcement that the Cattlemen's Association will be hosting their annual tradition of serving steak on a stick tomorrow from 11:01 p.m. They have changed the location. Yes, steak on the sticks tomorrow. You remember that for lunch. They have changed the location to the vault, so I'd be happy to have all of you join us there. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker.
Any other announcements? Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 11:30 a.m. Thursday, April 20th, 2023.
Representative Long moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 11:30 a.m. for 2023. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. Representative Long.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Long moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The House stands adjourned until 11:30 Thursday, April 20th, 2023.